I'm Christy Houle, Educational Outreach Coordinator for Educate.Today. Our event today is part of the St. Louis Teen Book Festival, sponsored by St. Louis County Library, HEC Media, and the Novel Neighbor Bookstore. Hosting over 39 of the hottest young adult writers, the St. Louis Teen Book Fest is 11 days of programming dedicated to connecting teen readers with a diverse group of popular writers. You can order all of our authors' books from our indie bookstore partner, The Novel Neighbor, at thenovelneighbor.com. And they are offering special discounts if you purchase a bundle of all the featured books on this panel. I'm thrilled to be hosting today's panel, Come On In, with four amazing contemporary young adult authors: Adi Alsaid, Misa Sugiura, Maurene and Varsha Barjaj. Thank you all for being here. This is an exceptional and powerful anthology that explores the joys, heartbreaks, and triumphs of immigration with stories by bestselling and beloved young adult authors who are themselves immigrants and the children of immigrants. So I thought we'd get started by giving each of our authors a few minutes to tell us about their personal story and how this project has impacted them. Adi, why don't we start with you?
Sure. My name is Adi Alsaid. I am the editor of the Anthology and also a contributor. I contributed a story called, I believe, Fleeing, Moving, Leaving, which was really, me thinking back on my family has a history of immigrating from one place to another. So it's not just me with my recent immigration to the US and also previous immigration to the US, but my parents moved from Israel to Mexico, where I was born. My grandparents moved from Syria and Bulgaria to Israel. And each of those, changes in location came under very different circumstances as the generations went along. And in thinking about how the world basically treats or thinks about immigrants, it occurred to me that, the world is way more critical of people who leave a place when they have less of a choice. That's when the world is the most critical. And in thinking of my own luck in choosing to move to the US, in the privileges that have come with my own immigration experiences and how those have differed from my family history. So I tweaked some things for the sake of fiction, but my character similarly comes from a family with a history of immigration.
That's great. Misa, how about your story?
My story is called Where I'm From, which is, I chose that title partly because of the sort of age-old question, where are you? Well, age-old, where are you really from? Which is a question that a lot of immigrant kids have to grapple with. And especially, those of us who were born in the States don't obviously, for obvious reasons, don't immediately jump to our parents' home country. So, and the story is about a young girl a teenage girl who has to grapple with feeling out of place, both in the United States and when she sort of goes and visits her parents' home country, Japan. Feeling out of place there. And in both places also wanting to claim the other country as well as the country that they're in at the moment. So and that it's probably the most autobiographical of any of the things that I've published. So I have two and then third novel coming out, and all of those draw a little bit from my life, but this one had a lot of my own personal experiences in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And Maurene?
My story is all like a D. I'm like, what's my story called again? A Big Tent. And like Misa and Adi, the story was fairly personal. I think it's not a coincidence that a lot of us find the story that we wanted for this anthology feeling personal, right? Because we're all either immigrants or children of immigrants. And I'm a child of an immigrant of immigrants. My parents are from Korea. So this story actually is stemmed from a little story I wrote a long time ago based on an experience my family and I had when we went camping. When our tent basically was a small tent that was just way too small for the whole family. It was one of many things that bothered me about this camping trip. And it got caught up in the wind and it flew up and it got stuck in a tree. And it was a very embarrassing moment for my family, where I felt so embarrassed. I was like a preteen or a teenager at the time. And, you know, it was just like another weird, embarrassing thing that my family had to do publicly because we didn't quite know how to camp. Like, that's how I felt. Like, we have been camping a lot, but like the way my family camps is like not what you imagine the all-American wholesome family camping, right? Like, we don't have the right tents, we don't have all the equipment, like we don't have proper chairs for everybody. We had to like sit on the cooler or on a rock. We always went in a giant group of 1 billion families and made Korean barbecue for food, you know, and it's not like hot dogs, and nobody really quite knew how to make a fire. So it was all this stuff that I wanted to write a story about, that feeling of feeling like the other, right? And feeling like you're always striving for trying to fit in, trying to be American. And like, honestly, no matter what you do, you never quite feel like you do it correctly. And then I also think when I think of immigration, and the experience of what it means to leave your home, I think of family always, because it's kind of this, it's a big driving factor of why everybody comes here, you know, dreams, but also dreams for your children. So I really wanted to write about the experience of what it means when you like grow apart from your family as part of your journey into becoming an American, and how that to me is a very specific, like an immigrant story.
Varsha?
So I am an immigrant, and I came to America in the fall of 1986. I was in my early 20s, and I was coming to attend graduate school. And at the time, I was studying psychology, and in my home country, India, I had been working with handicapped kids, and America was kind of where you went if you wanted to learn the latest, you know, whether it was in education or psychology or engineering or whatever else. And I was one of those people. And my story is called First Words. And so when I landed actually at St. Louis Lambert International Airport back in '86, I was told that I would be picked up by somebody from the foreign student office. And so there I was with my hard case suitcase, and there was nobody to pick me up. And I remember taking the coins out in my hand and going to a telephone booth trying to make a call to the foreign student office. And this was a Saturday, so of course I got a recording. You also have to remember that I had never made a phone on a payphone. We didn't have those in India. So there was the new currency, everything was new. And I lived in an apartment with 2 American students and 1 Australian student, and then the 4th person was me. And what I wanted to capture for this story was just the steep learning curve that an immigrant has to navigate, because literally everything was new. The light switch was new. And it was just this kind of, And I still had to go to school and make friends and keep a GPA because my scholarship depended on me maintaining a certain grade point average. So I really wanted to capture that feeling of just being in a completely new cultural environment and how an immigrant copes.
Yeah, yeah. And so for my next question, Adi, you might be the best one to start this off, but I'd love to hear from everyone. What was initially the inspiration for this anthology and collection of stories?
Well, for one, was just seeing more and more short story anthologies within YA and loving them. You know, like I think short stories were my way into writing. It was the first thing I attempted to write, and it was kind of my first love. And so seeing them, you know, get more of, find their place, these anthologies in YA, I was really excited to see that, and I wanted to contribute. And in trying to think of a uniting theme, I first thought of travel, but then I wanted something that had a little more like meat on its bones, and something that basically it like the theme of immigration came about because I think when I first pitched it to my agent, it was 2018, and I was starting to think about my immigration to the US. You know, obviously, like immigration as a topic that people in the US are thinking about has been increasing over the last 5-10 years, whatever. And so I wanted to, you know, I wanted to bring all these great voices in YA together and to bring more than just one story of immigrants or children of immigrants. I wanted to show that it is indeed a varied collection.
Yeah, Adi is the editor and he thought of this concept, but I really jumped on it because I forget when you approached us about this, because I'm like, what is time?
Yeah.
Because it feels like a long time ago, but it was kind of during the thick of, I mean, you know, all the Trump anti-immigration stuff. And it felt like a really, you know, I think everybody was feeling a little protective and angry and distressed by a lot of this stuff. So, you know, it was a nice kind of, like Adi said, like, I feel like fiction and it's such a empathy maker, and it's a great way to tell these stories and kind of work against kind of the hateful xenophobic stuff that's happening in this country. So I was really very excited and enthusiastic about writing something that could expand and show all the different facets of what, you know, because if you hear Adi's story and Misa, like we all have different experiences. So just to show like maybe people have like one concept of what immigrant means, it's like this widely varied experience. And it's like what makes up this country.
So were there aspects of the immigrant experience that are usually not portrayed in the media that you really wanted this anthology to highlight?
Well, you know, I mean, I think that the images in the media unfortunately focus on the illegal aspect of immigration, and it's very narrow. Even if the portrayal is extremely narrow. And I think for me personally, you know, back in 2015 or 16, there was the whole We Need Diverse Books movement. And I really connected with that because not only am I an immigrant, but I'm raising children who are first generation and they needed to see themselves on the page. So for me, it was a no-brainer. I really wanted to contribute and have a say to broaden that concept of who is an immigrant and what is immigration.
Yeah, I feel like just nuance, you know, there's like adding these are just 15 stories that we put out into the world, and hopefully it expands people's view of all the different, facets and shapes and ways that the immigrant story can come together. It is by no means all of them, but when, like Varsha said, there's only a very narrow scope that the media often talks about, then I think 15 stories can really help bring in some nuance, help make people think about how they have viewed immigrants. Yeah.
There is this kind of pervasive narrative of immigrants who have come in to take jobs or take whatever else. And I think that this anthology, when I was reading the stories, there is such a richness in terms of what immigrants give to the country. Yeah. It's not just a matter of take. And I think that's important to remember.
So let's move on to Maurene. In the story, The Bigger Tent, you drive home the idea of needing the closeness of your family while wishing they would go away and be distant at the same time. And at the end, you talk a little bit about the tent and what you had to do to retrieve the tent. Do you think that the rescue of the tent was as symbolic for everyone else in your family as it was for you?
Well, in real life, we had to have a really outdoorsy white man retrieve the tent for us. And that was triply embarrassing because we did not know how to do it. But so in the book, the story is about this pivotal moment in her life when she has, basically she had gone away for the summer to London for a fellowship thing. And then she comes back and they go on this camping trip. And when you leave your family for the first time, you feel so grown up and so wise, and you feel suddenly you see all the cracks, all the things, the flaws in your family because you've been away from them. And so that's what she's been doing in this story, and really feeling the friction of wanting to get away from their grip and get away from this unit. She wants to grow. And I think that's fine, of course, especially if you're 17 or however old she was supposed to be. But it's the way she's approaching it is so, she doesn't quite appreciate her family at that moment. And so it's just a moment for her to learn or to have this realization that, oh, I am my family and my family is me. I'll never be able to separate the two. And no matter what, no matter how much I grow, no matter how much I want my freedom and go out, I'll always have them, and it's sometimes that's for better or for worse, right? Because the people who know you your whole life, sometimes they keep you a little stifled. But I think in this case, I wanted them to, when they finally get the tent out of the tree, it's it's so symbolic for her. But I also imagine that it's symbolic for the rest of her family too, because it's both of the kids her older brother's already in college and she's going to leave. And so I feel all of them might've felt that, okay, this was a moment for all of us.
And Varsha, in your story, First Words, you focused heavily on assimilation and why people feel the need to assimilate. Can you describe the connection between the literature? So you clung to literature, and that was the connection. How was that the connection to the world that you had left behind?
So I was a reader. I've always been a reader. And growing up in India, we didn't have a whole lot of literature for young people that was Indian, other than there was this one big series of graphic novels called Amar Chitrakatha. And so we ended up reading a lot of British and American books. We mainly got series, and I became a reader when I first read Anne of Green Gables. I do think when I look back and, some of it is just a blur because like I said, there was just so much newness. And you were kind of thrown into this new world and you had to sink or swim. But I do think that my books and my literature gave me, it kind of introduced me to Western society. And it facilitated my adjustment, I felt. Assimilation was important. And I think that it was this kind of dance between assimilation and then keeping your own identity also. But for Priya in this story, it gave her that entry point. It was something that she had in common when everything else was different. And books can do that, and stories can do that. Stories do cross boundaries and cultures. And the reason I chose to write about that particular experience is I do think that just as this collection of 15 stories, I hope will touch somebody whose experiences are entirely different. So I think Anne of Green Gables and Little Women and Jo March gives Priya that little connection to people who are otherwise very different from her.
And Adi, your story, Fleeing, Leaving, Moving, really gave the anthology a strong conclusion and wrapped up all of the ideas delivered by the authors. Is there a deeper meaning to the 3 words in the title other than the obvious definitions?
No, kind of what I had mentioned at the start, which is how, like the way that the world views immigrants who are like those 3 verbs basically like can determine how the world sees you. If you are fleeing a place, then you are like a scourge wherever you go. And if you choose to leave and you have some sort of that privilege, then there's like a little less of a stigma against you. Like there's still very much like just the idea of leaving one country to try to find a better life for your family is still treated with like a lot of scorn, which is weird to me. But if you just happen to move, if you, like me, I have the privilege that I could like pay for immigrant visas, pay for a lawyer, I show up, and guess what? I'm also white and I speak English in a way that makes everyone comfortable, then I'm the good kind of immigrant and people are fine with that. And so just thinking about how those 3 verbs, like my specific family has gone through all 3 of them. And what the current world would say if, like my grandparents who fled Syria and Bulgaria during World War II, like right now they would be cast aside and like rejected wherever they went, whereas I'm accepted because I'm moving, I'm not fleeing.
So I want to wrap up our panel discussion with a final question for all of you. What is it that you would like for young readers to take from these stories?
I think the book as a whole, we've sort of talked about this, but I hope, and I think this was Adi's one of his purposes, maybe that in reading, if not all of them, at least like a healthy selection of them, that their understanding of immigrants, and this, I guess I'm talking about kids who are not immigrants, even kids who are, will expand. Like an East Asian immigrant is often in Adi's categories the kind of immigrant, often the kind who moves, because they're currently, because their dad got a job at Google, or someone went to grad school or something like that, and it's And those kids too need stories about what it's like to move here and not know the language, or what it's like to move here without papers because you are fleeing something. So I love the sort of more complete picture that this gives, that I hope people will take away from it.
Yeah, I do think that might be the biggest wish that I have for young people reading. Like, it's why I, and probably maybe most of us, started writing for young readers, because it's like the one way you can put in some positivity, or I'm not even saying like you have to teach them a lesson or anything, or morals or anything like that, but just a way to like open up the world at an age when, you're soaking all of that in, when you are still pretty, like, hopefully, like, willing to hear different stories and not so fixed in your beliefs, and so I think it's such a wonderful way to feature all these stories, different immigration stories, to paint a much more thorough, or paint a more, I don't know, I'm like, what's my metaphor here? But, paint like a beautiful tapestry, like the painting behind the D.
Yes. I feel like you can summarize it like what I want and like what drove me to put this book together, was like mirrors and windows. Like, I want this book to be a mirror for kids who don't see themselves represented very often in young adult fiction or in fiction in general. But I also want it to be a window into the lives of others, that someone who maybe has no immigrant history in their family, or someone who's, like a wide array of people can read about someone unlike them and learn about them and try to get more of a sense of others as real human beings.
I want to just jump in briefly with a hope that I have that is not to do with the sort of themes of the book, but just to point out the incredible artistry of these stories. I just am completely blown away with sort of like the literary merit. So if there's any teachers out there watching, I encourage you to use this in your classrooms, and to talk about not just the themes, but the actual structure and the symbolism and the word choice and the beautiful language and all of that. I just think I'm just so awed by the quality of writing just on its own in this book as well.
Misa,
Yeah.
I loved your format, because Misa did a bunch of vignettes. I thought that was very like powerful, because it was just these like bam, 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 impactful moments of race, where she's facing racism and stuff with her identity. So you're included in that wonderful array.
I love that about anthologies in general, like, as someone who loves reading a wide variety of styles and genres, to just have all that back to back to back, and to like see how different writers shine differently and do, have their own voices, it is great to see. And I'm really happy with how it came together, and thankful for all the great contributors that helped make the book what it is.
Well, thank you, Misa, Varsha, Adi, and Maurene. We truly appreciate your time. It's a wonderful anthology. So thank you very much for joining us on the panel today. And I would also like to thank HEC Media and Novel Neighbor. And remember, you can buy all of the books, including this one, at novelneighbor.com. And I just want to remind all the viewers that all of the Teen Fest events are available on either the library's Facebook or YouTube page. Thank you all very much.